November 2nd, 2016. It was an exciting time to be alive. Hillary Clinton was one of the only women to be campaigning for president in the history of the United States of America. She went up against Donald Trump in the 2016 election, but she sadly lost the vote, and Trump became the American president. But on that day, many women flocked to Susan B. Anthony's grave to thank her for allowing them to 1. Vote, and 2. Have a woman campaign for president. Susan B. Anthony was an activist, an abolitionist, and a women's rights leader. People would make postage stamps and coins in her honor, but why did they do it in her honor?
Well, she signed the 19th Amendment.
The law that allows women and African Americans to vote on no account of their race or their sex. Though this law was passed many years after her death, her legacy still lives on today when a woman says, "I voted."
Now here is our information about Susan B. Anthony's rough childhood. Susan was born February 15, 1820. She grew up on a farm in Adams, Massachusetts. Susan had a smart and quick mind, so she ended up reading and writing fluently by the age of 3. In other words, she could write quickly and neatly simultaneously. After a couple of years, Susan B. Anthony's sister went to Philadelphia to go to school and get an education. It was a strict and harsh school. Susan B. Anthony's teachers were rude and annoying as ever. She would often write in her diary daily and talk about how much she hated her teachers. But soon enough, disaster struck. Anthony's father lost the farm and had no money left. So, he had no choice but to take his fathers out of school and bring them back home. Though Susan was happy to get away from her teachers, she was also sad because she knew how much her father loved his farm. When she got home, she worked as a teacher in Union Canyon's Friends Cemetery in Rochelle, New York. And 7 years later, she became headmistress of Canajoharie Academy. There, she saw how women were treated and paid unfairly compared to men. 2 years later, Susan B. Anthony went to an abolitionist, or anti-slavery convention. At the convention, many people, including Frederick Douglass, a former slave who published a book called The North Star, spoke about slavery and its cons. But when Anthony went to speak, a man stopped her, saying that women must simply watch, not speak. This is what pushed her to her border and start a lifetime of work and perseverance.
In 1848, Susan B. Anthony organized the Seneca Falls Convention. There, Anthony gave speeches and talks about women's rights and how they were treated like pigs. In one speech, she said, "The worst enemy of women is the pulpit." For years, she continued to make famous speeches that we still know of today. In between Susan B. Anthony's arrest and trial, she spoke to 28 towns and villages in Monroe County, New York. She asked them, "Is it a crime for a U.S. citizen to vote?" Susan's last speech before she became ill says, "Failure is impossible." Now here is our information about life before Anthony. You see, 72 years before Anthony was born, the Founding Fathers wrote this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal." You realize how it said men, not women, not African Americans, but men. And this became a problem many years later with slavery. You see, when Thomas Jefferson was writing the Declaration of Independence, He thought about writing something that said no slavery, but in the end, it was cut out of the final draft. So this left slavery up for debate. This also led to a timeline of events from 1776 to 1839, which is where we are now. Now back to Susan B. Anthony. You see, before Susan B. Anthony, other women helped too. These people include Lucy Stone, Matilda Joslyn Gage, Abby Kelly Foster, Sojourner Truth, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Susan B. Anthony was inspired by their works and decided to follow down their path. After all, she said, independence is happiness.
Here are Susan B. Anthony's biggest moments. Before the convention at Seneca Falls, Amelia Bloomer introduced the one and only Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They became best friends and they helped each other do talks and speeches. Susan B. Anthony voted in the 1872 election, and in court, she quoted the 14th Amendment. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or the immunities of the citizens of the United States. In other words, she didn't do anything wrong. They never said men, only citizens. And women are citizens, so she never was supposed to get arrested. And she had to pay an unjust fine. And the judge was also being biased.
In her speech, "Is it a crime to vote?" she said, "It, the preamble, was we the people, not we the white male citizens, nor yet we the male citizens, but we, the whole people who formed this union, and we formed it, not to give the blessings or liberty, but to secure them, not to the half of ourselves and the half of our posterity, but to the whole people, women as well."
And the people in the room were only men, except for a couple women in the room that were ready to go to jail. And of course, it was Susan B. Anthony's idea to go to jail. And in the end, she never paid the fine anyway. And for this, she got a criminal record.
This last section is about how Susan B. Anthony and other women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton made a huge impact on the world, making it a giant turning point. Wyoming was the first state to allow women the right to vote in 1869. Women rejoiced when they could finally have their rights and votes. And from 1869 to 1896, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Idaho became the next 4 states to allow that right. And this became an even bigger turning point around the world. Susan B. Anthony celebrated her 80th birthday in the White House and died 6 years later. Anthony died a historical figure March 13, 1906, at the age of 86. But then 1914 rolled around. World War I allowed more opportunities for women to become engineers. Here, many women learned new skills and learned their personal value. In the end, the moral of the story is we the people can do anything. Here is our citing for our documentary.
And finally, here are the credits. Most of the script, Emma Soares. Some of the script, Hallie Barker. Some of the editing, Emma Soares. Most of the editing, Hallie Barker.
Pictures, Canva, Google, Library of Congress, National Women's History Museum, and gov.info. Information, Library of Congress, gov.info, National Geographic Kids, and NWHM. Voiceover, Emma Soares and Hallie Barker. The end.